Okay, well, we wanted to tell you a little bit about the Tenant Advocacy Project at the Public Justice Center. This is actually one of our longest running projects, probably over 2 decades now. And true to the Public Justice Center mission of always looking for systemic impact and using multiple strategies, the Tenant Advocacy Project has done that over the years. Let me tell you a little bit about what we're doing right now. There's a couple of components, and you're going to hear from each of the people who are really doing the work. We do a lot of advocacy at the district court, which in Baltimore is often referred to as the rent court. Mm-hmm. And the reason it's called that is because that's where you go when your landlord is evicting you for non-payment of rent, typically. You go to rent court. And there are a lot of cases at rent court. In Baltimore City, there are over 150,000 eviction cases filed every year. So this is a massive docket, and with a lot of people, almost all of them are unrepresented by lawyers. The trials are about 30 seconds on average, and that determines whether you get to stay in your house or not. And Levern and Genevieve can tell you more about that because they're over there representing the people. Another aspect of the Public Justice Center's tenant advocacy work is education. Levern Blackman does community presentations at tenant groups, community organizations, other social service organizations, and we have a film called Stand Up For Yourself in Baltimore City Rent Court, about a 20-minute film that tells tenants about their rights. We also have a lot of educational brochures and materials, and Levern basically gives a tenant's rights presentation to whoever wants to hear it. So that's one of our big efforts. Recently, actually in the last several years, we're quite involved in legislative advocacy. And one of the most recent efforts has been tenants who are being evicted because their landlord is being foreclosed. Now, we all hear about the foreclosure crisis and the fact that a lot of homeowners are losing their houses. But kind of the unknown part of that is that actually about 40% of the people who are losing their houses because of a foreclosure are not homeowners, but are tenants who are renting from the owner. And when the owner doesn't pay the mortgage, the tenant winds up losing their house. Now, there have been some big changes lately in state law, thanks to some of our legislative efforts, and at the federal level. And Matt Hill, who you're going to talk about, is starting a new project to represent these tenants. And again, we're trying to change the whole system here. We've also organized the Rental Housing Coalition, which is a group of tenant advocates all across the city and somewhat around the state to kind of take on any kind of issues. So that intro, you should talk to some people doing the work.
Talk to Matt. You want to continue?
Sure. Well, like John said, I'm starting with the Tenant Advocacy Project just a couple weeks ago, and working to enforce new laws protecting tenants when the landlord's in foreclosure. The biggest change in the law is that in Maryland, at least, before just until recently, foreclosure used to extinguish the tenancy. The renter would have to leave the property after foreclosure was complete. Now, May 20th, there was a federal law passed. It's going to allow most tenants to stay in the property for the rest of the term of their tenancy, even after foreclosure. Other tenants will at least get 90 days after the foreclosure to leave the property. But the first part of my project, at least, is going to be getting the word out, because a lot of foreclosing entities are not up to speed on that law and have not been giving out notices that inform renters about the law. And so part of the first thing we're going to do is really get the word out that tenants have these rights, and they need to assert these rights with the foreclosing law firm or the bank. And then also represent tenants to make sure that these new protections are enforced, and to ensure that they get to stay in their homes when they're allowed to by the law. So we're working together with a pretty broad coalition to bring that about. We're working with the Legal Aid Bureau and a number of other groups to make sure that the renters know that they have these rights, and to make sure that they're enforced in court.
Great. Would you like to add anything?
I actually am in training.
Okay.
for the tenant advocacy. I've been with them under 6 months.
Okay.
So I'm coming to PJC basically because I was a tenant a year ago in a tenant-landlord situation where they were trying to wrongfully evict me.
Mm-hmm.
Just because they felt they needed to release us. Actually, what happened was I was trying to get some information on some fraudulent documents within my lease that the management was not willing to share why the information was listed how it was. So we ended up going through a full court process and we won. It was judged that we could not be evicted unless we either had not paid our rent 4 months out of a year or was interfering with the property being maintained properly. So I just want to help make a positive difference to get the word out to the tenants out here, again, that don't have a clue as to their rights.
Would you like to add anything, sir?
Sure, yeah, it's kind of amazing to hear Ms. Nichols' story because it kind of reflects how I felt when I first saw the difference in how the process, the court was treating tenants as opposed to landlords. I was in the clerk's office and doing another legal matter and saw this, and I was there for about an hour, and I was like, this is truly amazing. This court is supposed to be for the people, not for the landlords, for the people, which means tenants and landlords on equal basis. That's so not the case. It's gotten a lot of different change over those almost 15 years, but the problem still exists. There's a daunting task of trying to make the playing field level for tenants who 98% of the time are not represented in rent court and who are going up against well-seasoned professionals, agents for landlords, lawyers, and what have you. We constantly try to educate folk so they will be in a position to protect their rights.
I'm thinking maybe, Lever, do you want to talk a little bit about the Clean Streets legislation we did?
The picture behind you it graphically demonstrates what used to happen in Baltimore City for many, many years. When a tenant was evicted, the landlord had the right to place the tenant's belongings in the right-of-way, which means in the street, legally in Baltimore City. And this was just a backwards system. It created eyesores for the neighborhood. It, attacked a citizen when they are most vulnerable, when they can't pay their rent, and they lose all their belongings. It just was a backwards way to do that. It was also just mean-spirited, I thought. So what we did, we proposed legislation. There was a better way to do this. We proposed legislation in Annapolis, couldn't get it done statewide. But on a second effort, we proposed legislation locally here in Baltimore City to pass a law which would outlaw this practice. And it's outlawed now. It's $1,000 a day fine if landlords put tenants' belongings on the street. Number one, the tenant has at least 3 weeks' notice ahead of time that gives him the time and date of the eviction. The landlord has to send a certified and a registered mail at least 14 days before the eviction, and 7 days they had to come back before the eviction. They had to come back and post on the tenant's door the time and date of the eviction. Also, if an eviction takes place, a sheriff must be present. The landlord has to prove to the sheriff that he did all 3 of these postings in a timely manner. If he can't do that, the sheriff takes the landlord back to court that day, and the landlord goes before the court, and the judge can give the tenant 2 more weeks to stay in the property if he can't prove that he did all 3 of the postings. So that system is a much better system for tenants in Baltimore City. And that came from the efforts, the PJC leading the way in the coalition of the tenant advocates throughout the city and the state to get that done.